In this online presentation, we'll do a walkthrough of how to submit Congress eLegislation. Student Congress is growing by leaps and bounds in the state of Virginia, and the Virginia Forensic League is at the vanguard of eLegislation. Now, what is eLegislation? Well, Congress is a simple environment where students replicate what occurs in a chamber of Congress. In this case, it's representatives. Now, at states, it's either representatives or senators. Now, how do you register for Congress? Well, you register for Congress several ways. Remember, we like to have several ways to do things to make sure that everybody's caught up. You could either register for submitting Congress legislation here. Remember, your students have to be registered on online registration. But let's submit Congress legislation, or if what is the preferred method, because I really love the map, the calendar is really an effective way to do everything. So let's go to the calendar, and we're registering for, let's go and register for Shenvaffel. We've already registered as a school for Shenvaffel. Now we need to get our Congress online. So when we download the calendar, we can click on the legislation deadline for Shenvaffel. We click here, and it takes us to the Congress Master page. The Congress Master page is for the entire state, and we select, therefore, the league we're going to register for put our submission of Congress stuff on. All right, so we e-submit. What's e-submit? Well, e-submit takes us to a nice web page where it says select the tournament. It says Shenvaffel here. We're going to register for Shenvaffel 1. And now the legislation, you should have your students write it beforehand, Word or something else. This is a legislation that was from states AAA this last year, which we've adopted. The title is a resolution to assist Pakistan's fight against terror. So therefore, it's what? It's a resolution. It's Pakistan, so therefore it's an international. The date submitted is important. Why is it important? Because the date submitted tells you, will create the document coding. Don't tell your students to play around with the date because the online legislation is rather simple. It makes sure that every piece of legislation has its own docket. We can tell when something's submitted on the website. So if they're trying to get something in past the deadline, sorry, it's not going to work. The website's invalid. And this morning it's 10:15 a.m. Okay, good. Notice if it were later, this is it doesn't really matter. It just gives you. We'll say why that's important. Okay, title of legislation. You just simply go back and you have the student highlight the page. Okay, there's the title. Line 1. You should have them write only so many characters across because we only take about 41 characters to go through the page. Alright, whereas Pakistan is seen as many powerful ally key to the United States in the war on terror, and we have a skip a line. I don't know, how do we skip a line? We don't hit enter. When you hit enter, it submits the legislation, and it's called a null piece of legislation because it's not done. So you just skip a line by hitting tab. Whereas President Musharraf, yada yada, hit tab again to go to the next line, and so on, and so on. There's a lot of whereases here, and those whereases are nice. We're going to skip a few of the clauses because we want to just speed on up ahead. So we're going to go down to the payoff, be it resolved. Okay, be it resolved by this here Congress assembled to increase military aid to Pakistan and to assist the war on terror and condition that, etc., etc. We have one more clause to do for fun. There it is. Do-do-do. Bum. It's all very simple to cut and paste. Control-C copies, Control-V pastes. Very simple. Your students should have that all picked up because, they're pretty smart. And then you just go on to the bottom one. There it is. Respectfully submitted by, let's go Fritz, the Wonder Pigeon from Sample High School. You go submit legislation to the clerk. And now the Congress has been submitted. Now you can print that up, and notice it puts lines in. Lines are important in Congress legislation. Well, what does this do? Well, this allows, all of this e-legislation allows something very important, which is that everybody will have a docket of the legislation that's submitted for all the Congress. Now, we'll delete the docket, we'll delete the legislation every year, although we prefer to actually keep it up and you just have to print the pages. There's the legislation we just submitted. Notice it says resolution number I, because we typed international, 0819. Well, that's our date and that's our time. That's the docket number. That's what that legislation is called. It's a unique docket number. Now at the bottom, you see the date it was submitted and the time. This is very important for students to realize, is that if you submit earlier, you're better off, because the Clerk of Congress will set the docket. It's not the date, it's done according to submission date and time and event. So therefore we'll do domestic, the international, the Virginia, the economic, and we'll cycle through. So, and according to time. So this is the first piece of legislation submitted, and then we go to the next piece of legislation. That was domestic, and this is economic. Okay, well that's going to be good, but that'll be the fourth piece of legislation. So we look for the next international. Well, that's an economic, so that's going to be down the line. There's another domestic. There's another economic. There is an international. Well, that's going to be the second piece of legislation. And there, let's look for a Virginia piece of legislation. I don't see one. I see some null files, but I don't see one of those. Ah, there's the Virginia, the red light camera. Though that's going to be, we're going to set the docket that way, because the purpose of Congress and WAFL is not to have a lot of committees and wasting time. It also gives an advantage to larger schools, but to get the legislation up so people have the most amount of time to prepare and give good speeches, as well as give lots of speeches. All right, let's go to that legislation packet again. Every one of your students should have a copy of the legislation packet. Now there's 41 lines. Why are there 41 lines? Because on most printers it should print up one document per page. Well, let's find out. Let's go to print preview. And when we go print preview, we will see the entire legislation packet. Now when you look at the preview, it's up for all of the legislation packets. Now we finally print, because you need to have the legislation packet for the tournament, so you print, you find out when that tournament legislation is, and then go from there. Every student needs a copy. Don't print them all out at one time. Just print out one copy and then take it to the photocopier. One-sided, because the docket changes. Okay? That looks pretty good. Looks like we have everything set. Let's go to two-page view just for fun to make sure our margins are correct. Hey, our margins are correct. It prints out one sheet per page. Isn't that cool? I think it's super cool. All your students should have a copy of the legislation for that tournament on hand. They can start their research beforehand, and they should all be ready, well set to do everything they need. Well, that's how Congress works, at least the e-legislation. We think it's an incredibly powerful tool, and one that will allow students to give better speeches because they have better research. It's important to know what everybody's going to be speaking on directly. We hope that this has been instructive, and you have a great season in the Virginia Forensic Leagues in your Congress debate.